I'm Frank Ticheli, professor of composition at the Thornton School of Music at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Some people believe, and I agree with these people, that you can't really teach composition. And there's a lot of truth to that. It's this mysterious process that we don't quite understand. It's a process in which the head and the heart are constantly keeping each other in check. And the tension between those two forces is what creates a piece of music. If one takes over too much, the piece will suffer usually. But it's a real mystery. It's a house of mirrors where the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And I think I'll go to my grave not really understanding how one composes. We teach craft courses like counterpoint, the study of putting one line against another line, orchestration, the study of the instruments, that kind of thing. But the actual teaching of creativity is a difficult thing to do. I find myself often being a kind of a cheerleader or a psychologist, sort of trying to get inside of the soul of my students and find out where they're coming from, what they're trying to do, and what their inhibitions are and their fears are, and where they feel insecure. I challenge those negative voices in the heads of a lot of young composers, things that they've heard maybe in their past, like I can come up with ideas, but I never know what to do with them, or I compose more slowly than almost anybody I know, that kind of thing. We all have that. Every single composer suffers from those same things, and so I try to help them to get beyond that to more positive ways of thinking. I also try to get them to look at what they have composed, that is, to enjoy and to literally pat themselves on the back for what they have completed instead of just lamenting what remains to be done. We spend a lot of our lives looking at a blank page, and once you finish a page of music, there's another blank page, and the constant awareness of that and focusing too much on that will eventually lead to burnout, because we're always faced with that blank page, and you have to spend some time looking at what you've already accomplished. There's a surprisingly large number of ways to make a living as a composer. I remember when I first decided I wanted to do this when I was just a kid, the usual parental worries were there. My father was worried about me pursuing this career, and in a sense it's kind of an irrational decision to be a composer or an artist of any kind, because people are always telling you how tough it's going to be, and you do it because you have to do it. However, and I think we celebrate this here at the Thornton School, there are so many ways that a composer can make music, not just writing concert music or chamber music. I happen to write a lot of music for young people. In addition to writing for professionals, I write a lot of music for high school aged musicians who are still developing as musicians, and I take that music just as serious as I do my music for professionals, and I'm just as proud of that music. And there happen to be a lot of high school ensembles in this country, so that's one way to make money. It's quite a large body of just a lot of high school bands in the country and so forth. I just had a lesson with a student who made a pretty good living writing music for video games, computer video games and so forth, and it's quite lucrative. We have a fabulous film composing school here as well. You can make a pretty good living writing for films, orchestrating for films, ghostwriting, all kinds of aspects of film composing. One thing I like to stress to my students is to discover who you are first, and don't think about writing to make a living, and and don't dwell on what should I do that will make me a living. You have to first make sure you know who you are, and you're writing music that reflects who you are. And then once you've done that, you can then perhaps think about possibilities for how you can make your living at it. In other words, if you really do see yourself as a film composer and not someone who's going to change the concert world or change the history of concert music, then you probably shouldn't go that direction. You should go towards the film direction. On the other hand, if you're trying to be a film composer because you think that's going to make you a living, but that's not who you are, you could get into real trouble and real pain. And again, it can lead to burnout because you're doing something that you're not enjoying, really. You've got so many sources of income as a composer. You've got royalty checks, but even that divides up into different kinds. First of all, royalty checks from separate publishers. Then you've got your commission payments Also, there's the performance rights royalties, which is separate from a publisher royalty. That's the publisher royalty is for the actual sheet music, and then the performance rights royalty is for example, if an orchestra plays your music, they have to pay a fee to either ASCAP or BMI, and then those organizations in turn pay the composer. So that's a performance rights royalty. And then you've got, as I said, the commission royalties, and then there are guest appearance. There's guest appearance money as well, which is I go off and guest conduct my music quite often, a good 10 to 20 times a year, and make an appearance either to conduct it or just to come and advise. Usually I conduct the music because I do a lot of conducting. So it's tricky because you've got all these different kinds of income, and so it varies from year to year as well. That's everything to me. Knowing what the instruments can do and what they can't do is everything. Not so much just to be able to then write for those instruments in ways that gratify those instruments. In a way, you have to know what the rules are so that you can then break the rules. In other words, to know what the limitations are so that you can push those limitations, rather than just starting right away writing for these instruments but not knowing what they can do or can't do. In other words, being informed first. Being creative and being revolutionary but informed creativity is really important, I think. So it's really important. A lot of my ideas come directly out of the instruments themselves. For example, I may first decide I'm going to have an off-stage trumpet solo first before I have any music written for that instrument. And then that alone will inspire the notes that I end up coming up with for that instrument, rather than vice versa. I'm writing a bunch of notes, now who am I going to give this to? That's, to me, a backwards way of thinking. So much of the time, the instruments will inspire the music itself. You know, I considered myself a composer while I was a student at my undergraduate years in Texas and then graduate school in Michigan. I was composing for, in some cases, professional groups and so forth. So I did that before I became a teacher. And I have to say, it's very difficult. It's just as difficult to be a teacher in this business as it is to be in the business of composing. And with every new piece of music, you have to start over. I mean, literally I feel like a beginner each time I start a new piece. There's that moment at the beginning where I feel as though all the training I've had means nothing at this point until I get past a certain point. And that's a frightening moment. It's a little bit scary, and it's a period when you're very vulnerable. And the music is also vulnerable. And it just requires a lot of patience and a lot of courage. Courage to think and realize big ideas, and patience to stay with those ideas while they're in their infancy. Because when they're young, they're very fragile. And it's very easy to say, oh, this is junk, and throw it out. You've got to give that brand new little baby a little bit of time first and nurture it and see where it's going and not just give up on it too soon. That takes both patience and courage. I can't often separate those two, patience and courage. They go hand in hand for a composer. Every composer has to spend a lot of time listening to music. We may spend as much time listening as we do composing. We're sort of like sponges. We have to soak in as much as we can, actually. And then, it's sort of a silly metaphor, but when we then wring ourselves out, we hope that what comes out is something that is original and fresh and doesn't sound like a patchwork of all those influences. If you worship one composer too much at any given time, you run the risk of sounding like that composer. And so I find listening to a variety of composers, and of course knowing the literature is that's just square one for any composer, knowing all the repertoire. But listening to a variety of music helps. For example, if I'm composing a choral piece, I may listen to a lot of chamber music, string quartets, or orchestral music. And on the other hand, if I'm writing a piece for orchestra, I might listen to vocal music and so forth, to stay away, not to get too close to the medium, but just to listen to music, just to be in that world of music, I find really helps. Again, it's if you try to sound like one composer or even a few composers, you end up sounding like nobody. You have to absorb those composers and make them your own, sort of absorb them into your own musical DNA. And then what comes back out is hopefully something that's original. Students spend a lot of time concerned about this because students haven't developed their own voice yet. It takes a lot of time. And I often tell the students, don't worry about it yet. It's okay to sound a little bit like so-and-so or so-and-so, some other composer at this point, because you're still learning. And in time, you don't have to search for your own voice. In time, your voice will find you. It just takes patience again. You don't learn how to write music that will communicate universally, to write a masterpiece. I don't think you learn how to do that. It just happens. It will visit you if it wants to. Again, you have to have all the things, the ingredients required are the passion, the skills, the counterpoint and the orchestration, and all the training and the harmony, the courage and the patience. You have to have all of those things, and still you have to wait for inspiration like that to visit you. And when it does, and it happens by accident, often when you don't expect it, it may happen when you're working hard on a piece that you think is not going well. I find it seldom happens on a piece that I think is going well. So it's really mysterious. It's sort of like a stray cat. It will visit you when it wants to visit you, and while it's there, you better nurture it. You better put that milk out there, and it will come when it wants to come, and then it may leave in a week or a day, and you just better enjoy it while it's there and take advantage of it. I think the most important thing required for any musician is passion. You have to have a passion for this business and this art. Without that, no amount of talent is going to help you succeed in this business. Passion, and I'm not talking about the kind of passion that makes someone say, oh, I just love music and I love to listen to it all the time and so forth. Not just that sort of cheerleader type passion. I mean the kind of passion that will allow you to sit in a chair with an instrument or with a pencil and a blank page for hours. Hours and hours of what could be very lonely time as you start to add up these days and weeks and months and years. It can be a very lonely occupation. Most of our time is not spent in the spotlight, but spent by ourselves with an instrument or with pencil and paper. And without that passion, you're asking for a really painful life. You've got to have that passion and that drive. That's what ignites and nurtures the fire in the belly.